Okay, this again follows the project management, follows the CSI format, goes through each section because that's the way you do a construction job according to those steps. Okay, estimating and bidding. The estimating and bidding process uses plans and specifications, the specs, and matches them to available company personnel to determine the quantities of materials, labor, and subcontract labor that will be required to properly bid a contract. The project contract is bid from the plans and specifications. They must be followed exactly, as any deviation from the plans and specifications will be the responsibility of the contractor, and he or she may and will likely be responsible for paying to make any corrections. Okay, specifications, or the specs as they're called. The specifications are a book of rules governing all the material to be used and the work to be performed on the construction project. The specifications are the guiding document and take precedence over the plans or other project documents. When differences exist between the plans and the specification, this should be discussed between the owner and the contractor, and the outcome of these discussions should be put in writing and signed or initialed by all parties to the contract, the owner, the builder, and the architect. The CSI format, the Construction Specifications Institute, CSI, master format described in Walker's, is considered the industry standard numbering classification for bid packages. The master format, the general clauses and conditions of the master format specify the legal requirements of the project. So you have one, a notice to bidders, a schedule of drawings, instruction to bidders, proposal, agreement, and general conditions. The notice to bidders describes the project, its physical location, the time and place of the bid opening, and where and how plans and specifications can be obtained. The schedule of drawings is a list by number and title of all the drawings related to the project. The instructions to bidders, this section provides a brief description of the project, the location, and how the job is to be bid, either lump sum, one contract, or separate contracts for the various construction trades, such as plumbing, heating, electrical, and swimming pool. The proposal. The proposal is a form made by the contractor, which is a legal instrument that binds the contractor to the owner if the contractor completes the proposal properly, the contractor does not forfeit the bid bond, the owner accepts the proposal, the owner signs the agreement, the proposal may show or call for alternate bids. The project manager consults with the contractor to determine which alternate bids have been accepted. Okay, agreement. The owner and the contractor sign the agreement, and the result is a legally binding contract. General conditions. This section details general clauses including in the CSI master format. They include general notes, definitions, contract documents, insurance, workmanship, and materials, substitutions, shop drawings, payments, coordination of work, corrections to work, guarantees, compliance with all the laws and regulations, other circumstances worth noting. The conditions under the general conditions are not procedural. All have equal weight in the document. Therefore, everyone involved must study each item before taking a position and assuming any responsibilities with respect to the project. According to the CSI master format, the contractor must use qualified individuals for the site work, such as land surveyor or engineer. The contractor must be careful, as any utilities damaged while digging are the responsibility of the contractor. The contractor must maintain an office on the site and may be required to provide a telephone at the job site. Temporary toilet facilities, temporary lighting and power, temporary heating, if necessary, are to be provided by the contractor. The contractor agrees to replace faulty equipment and correct construction errors for a period of 1 year. Estimating. Planning is the process of determining requirements and devising and developing methods and schemes of action for the construction of a project. Planning is a combination of activities necessary, materials, equipment and manpower estimates, site layout, material delivery and storage, work schedules, quality control, specialty tools, environmental protection, safety, and progress control. Estimating is the process of determining the amount and type of work to be performed and the quantities of the materials, labor, and equipment needed to do the job. Methods of estimating. You have the square foot method is based on cost per square foot. Detailed survey of piece method consists of listing all materials and labor needed for the project. Unit price method determines the cost of each unit of construction, such as concrete slab, formwork, doors, walls, just as in the piecework method. Approximate estimate is less detailed and is based on deriving project costs from previous projects. This approach is often used in combination with the square foot method. Types of estimates. Preliminary estimates establish costs for budget proposals and identify general manpower requirements. Detailed estimates are a precise statement of quantities of materials, equipment, and manpower required to construct a given project. Activity estimates list all the steps necessary to construct a given project. Materials estimates list of materials and quantities required to construct a given project. The equipment estimates list the equipment, time, and number of pieces necessary to construct a given project. The manpower estimates estimate of the direct labor man days required to complete various activities of the specific project. Estimating guidelines. Use pre-printed or column forms and record phone numbers as well. Use only the front side of each paper form. Be consistent in listing dimensions. Use printed dimensions where given. Add up multiple printed dimensions. Use each set of dimensions to calculate related quantities. Convert foot and inch measurements to decimals. Do not round off your quantities. When doing takeoffs, mark drawings with different colors to determine what you've already taken off. Group similar items together. Identify location and drawing numbers. Note NTS, not to scale. If you're working on a drawing, you're going to see this on the exam. They're telling you you can't do takeoffs as if it was to scale. In point of fact, probably the 32nd scale on the engineering ruler could be used as a guesstimation if you can't figure it out any other way. Okay, develop a method for making an estimate. List all gross dimensions that can or will be used again. Utilize design summary or repetition. Do not convert units until you make a total. Change orders and alterations. Figure the total basic system and then figure the alterations and subtract them from the basic system to avoid any confusion of using negative numbers. Measure and list everything on the drawings. Add items not specifically listed but necessary to complete the job. So estimating is usually considered the success or downfall of most construction jobs. If you can't figure out the manpower and materials you're going to need, you can't figure out your costs, and so you can't figure out what you ought to be charging. Estimating controls. Use a pre-printed summary sheet and check to see that all of the items have been calculated. Use a rule of thumb check to make a rough estimate. If a significant difference exists between the rule of thumb checks and the total amount of the bid should be rechecked and the estimator should be required to justify any significant deviations from the rough estimate. Construction contracts. If a conflict exists between the drawings and the specifications, it is usual that the specifications control. Should a construction requirement appear only in the specifications and not in the drawings, or vice versa, the contractor must provide the requirements just as though they were included in both places. That's usually a question on the contractor's exam. Critical path method. The critical path is covered in Walker's Chapter 1 as well as in the Contractor's Manual Chapter 10. This is an important part of the contractor's exam, and you need to know how to do a forward pass and a backward pass through a flow chart to determine the earliest finish date and the latest start date. All right, critical path method. Uses sequential activities, require that one activity be substantially complete before the next one begins. Simultaneous activities are activities that are not critical nor directly dependent on the critical activity. That is to say, they can be completed within the time frame of a critical activity. Calculate an accurate duration for each activity. The highest sum of activity durations that form a continuous chain of sequential activities through the planned project, allowing contingency time for weather and other delaying factors, is the scheduled duration of the entire project. That's also called your forward pass. Common test question. The principal objective of construction scheduling is to efficiently manage the resources used in the construction process. Planning. Planning is the most time-consuming and critical element of the construction schedule process. The principal considerations of CPM planning process involve a detailed breakdown of work items. The activity, responsibility to subcontract work. The second activity, craft and crew requirements. The next activity, material requirements. Next activity, equipment requirements. The location of the work, the subdivisions of the work, and the cost control breakdown. This is out of Walker's. Test-taking strategies. It may make it easier to write out a sequence from the network diagram, then add up the days for each activity. As you're going through one of these diagrams, network diagrams as they're called, it can get confusing. But if you just take it and write it out in a line, and then put the number of days after each one of the activities and then add them up in a line, that usually makes it much more logical or easier to figure out than trying to work your way actually through the diagram. So this is out of the Contractor's exam book that I advised you, that I think I mentioned to you that you might want to buy a copy of this. This book is absolutely great for helping you pass the day 2 of the exam. It might be easier for you to make these into a straight line column like it's a statement or financial statement, rather than trying to go through this, this diagram. Some test-taking strategies. It may be easier to write out the sequence from the network diagram and then add up the days like it was a spreadsheet. These activities are critical. That is, they are in the critical part of the activities that must be completed in sequence and on time in order for the project to finish on schedule. In this example, the 3 nodes have a duration of 4 days plus 12 days plus 2 days. And so your critical path is 18 days, which represents your early finish date of these 3 activities. So the next section is activity nodes. The activities are critical. That is, they're on the critical part of the activities that must be accomplished in sequence and on time in order for the project as a whole to finish on schedule. Okay, and then we have an influence diagram that shows you where the placement of your early start, left-hand corner, left-hand top corner. Your EF, your early finish, is your right-hand top corner. Your late start date is your left-hand bottom corner. And your LF, late finish date, is your bottom right-hand corner. And you also have your float. If there's any float, it will be listed after the late finish date. Node labels. D is duration of time of the activity. ES is your early start date. EF is your early finish date. LS, your late start date. LF, your late finish date. FS is finish to start constraint between 2 activities. SS is a start to start constraint between 2 activities, which is your wait time. And the FF is your finish to finish constraint between 2 activities. You just need to know what these are. You don't have to know how to do the whole thing. Understanding CPM, the early start date of an activity is the earliest date the activity can possibly begin, allowing for the time required to complete preceding activities. The early finish date of an activity is the very latest it can finish and still allow the project to be completed by a designated time or date. The late start date of an activity is the latest possible time that it can be started and still allow the targeted completion date of the project to be met. The late start is obtained by subtracting the activity's duration from its late finish time. The forward pass. Early start and early finish proceed from left to right. Each activity starts just as soon as the last of its predecessor activities is finished. Each activity has its own activity box. The ES of each activity is calculated first. The EF, or early finish, is then obtained by adding the activity duration to its ES, or early start value. The EF, or early finish, is recorded in the upper right corner of the activity box. This is all covered in Walker's, Chapter 1. Merge activities. The rule for merge activities on the forward pass is that the earliest possible start time is equal to the latest or largest early finish of the value of the activities immediately preceding this activity. The backward pass. In the backward pass, you calculate the late start date and the late finish date for each activity. Each activity must finish as late as possible without delaying the project completion. Burst activities. The rule for burst activities, which are more than one activity following them, is that the late finish value of a burst activity is equal to the earliest, smallest, late start for the activities that follow it. Again, that's out of Chapter 1, Walker's. Float. Float is the time leeway that exists in the schedule of some activities, but not in others. There are two types of float. There's total float, for an activity is obtained by subtracting the early start from the late start time. Free float of an activity is found by subtracting its early finish time from the early start time of the activity or activities that directly follow it. Free float is the amount of time an activity can be delayed without affecting the early start of the following activity. Zero float is called the critical path of the scheduled network. The significance of float is that it indicates the degree to which an activity is critical, how much delay this activity can absorb without delaying the entire project. PERT charts. PERT uses three separate estimations for the duration of each activity: optimistic activity duration, probable activity duration, and pessimistic activity duration. Milestone schedules. A milestone schedule lists the dates anticipated for the start or completion of key and critical project activities and work sequences as a measurement of project progress. Well.